Peace in Islam. So what we got right here is the Great East or Grand Orient, and this is approximately 800 BC. So we got Egyptian hieroglyphics, Celtic, Ogham, Iberian Punic script, Libyans, and Mayan we got the Basque script. So we see in the Orient, in the East, North America, we got the monuments. Today we're going to talk about this Phalli or phallus. So we can see 800 BC, we already got sea travel all around the world. So we already got an empire going on. So again, the records of this world empire is being kept in certain temples. So we got in Egypt, you can see it at the Moors sailing in the early days. Another one, clearly Moors. Let me see it sailing. Most historians would claim that these Moors, aka Egyptians, was sailing the Indian Ocean. But as we can see, evidence abound in North America of their presence. So basically in chapter 47, evidence to that chapter being found everywhere in America. The tribes of the tribes of New Mexico inherited a civilization more or less perfect from extinct races which occupied that country before them is an undisputable fact. And no, it's not, because people like to say that none of the people here today got anything to do with any of this, as of all the people who've been in this empire disappear. Like they say what the Mayans, they get on a spaceship and go somewhere, I guess, and new people come and populate the world. That's how a lot of scientists and theologians, historians think, for some strange reason, as if people don't multiply and live on. No barbarous nations, see, that's how they justify it, are nations. So they assuming that the modern day versions of these people is barbarous on their understanding of things. Have executed the structural monuments that have been particularly described, or have fabricated the multifarious works of art that are daily brought to light. Both the one and the other established their early existence of settled, industrious, and to some extent cultivated people. Whence then did that people derive their practical knowledge of the useful art and all the concomitants of ancient civilized life? Or were they these things really, as not a few imagine, of cis-Atlantic origin? And that's what it is, it's been sea travel. That inquiry depends upon another and much more pertinent one, namely, were the primitive occupants of the northern continent of America immigrants or autochthons? And both. Ethnographers Naturalists, archaeologists have attempted in vain to solve these problems. Scarcely two of them are the same opinion. As yet, no satisfactory hypothesis has been framed from general acceptance. Scandinavia, Gaul, Mauritania, Carthage, Egypt, Palestine, Hindustan, China, Mongolia, Siberia, and even Wales and Ireland are supposed by some of to have furnished their respective quarters toward the peopling of the New World, which is true. All those things they just finished name, the evidence suggests that all these peoples been the peopling of early America, being on both sides, being on just like today, people in America from all over the place, and they've been like that for a long time. Ancient times, kingdoms rise and falls, people change, all those things is true. But what they're doing, they're looking for Mauritanians and Carthaginians and Egyptians based off their understanding of those things. But the people still here, they just forget their history, forget who they is, call themselves black people and Afro Mexicans and stuff like that, putting themselves in another man's timeline using those terms instead of your own timeline, like chapter 47 give you. We're gonna read all this about. We're gonna let me see. Okay. Americans derived their religious system in part from the East. Talk about the Grand Orient, and that's the East. The worship of the lingam which is the phallus, was flourishing in the cities of Pameco and Tlaxcala in Mexico at the period of conquest, and Mr. Stevens observed at Uxmal in Yucatan certain ornaments upon the external cornice of several large buildings, the meaning of which was too plainly sculptured to be misunderstood. Nor was the revolting worship restricted to the territories just indicated. It appears to have been equally prevalent in the Gulf states, and as far north as Tennessee, where innumerable characteristic images have been plowed up, some form of clay, and this the early 1900s, I think. And other carved out of the kind of amphibolic rock, the toughest of all the stony substances. Bearing in mind that the Oriental nations are the Easterners. That's what Oriental means. I think in the last video I said something about history being reconstructed by the Orientals. I mean to say Orientalist. Grand Orient Freemasonry. Let me show the beginning. The East of anywhere is the Grand Orient to the Freemasons. So let's check that out. And you see the Grand Orient of France, the Great East of France, the Great East of Italy, Great East of Poland, the Great East of Portugal. I got North America, South America, the Great East of Venezuela, Great East of Spain, Great East of Brazil. So you get the point. If you don't know that, you'll believe that all history and everything you see in history, biblical, Quranic, you'll see you putting it all in the East because of this right here, Grand Orient. But they're talking about the East of anywhere, no matter where you at. As a Freemason, you in the Grand Orient, because of the cultures is pretty much the same on both sides of the Atlantic. So it's a knowledge originally by one object of devotion, the sun, with which they presently associated the doctrine of the reciprocal principles of nature, doctrine which passed from India into Ethiopia and Egypt, thence into Asia Minor, and so into Greece and in Rome. It is impossible to withhold from the inhabitants of the Western Hemisphere the coveted distinction of the highest antiquity when we find their remote ancestors possessing the same system of theology and adopting the same objects of worship as the most ancient and cultivated people of the old world. So that goes back to all our videos will be making that same claim. With almost all the Aborigines, there is a proof of existence of a belief in the supreme being, an extinction polytheism based on the origin of upon the principles of divine emanations. And we can go to the next one. So again, we're gonna prove that, not prove, but give evidence for chapter 47 using this text. That there are now no means of determining at what particular epoch in the world history of the worship of the lingam. You can see an obelisk was that also in India, or Pior Apis in Egypt, of the phallus in Greece, or the Priapus in Rome. So we always say the same thing: Greece, Rome, Egypt, India. All those are place terms for empires. And spreads throughout the world. Say, but according to the received chronology of the Bible, the worship of Baal Peor prevailed among the Moabites 1,450 years before Christ. So again, that's why you see Moab said that's what the signs of Egypt, of the Moabites, that Esau bring back at his time. So you got 1,450 years before his time, and these sciences already exist, or long before it was received into Europe. From the remains which were still in existence, it may have passed into America at a time coeval with its introduction into Egypt. So you got the same people on both sides, building pyramids and obelisks, what I believe is the main reason dealing with astrological things, but I think you've been dealing with, like, if you're in an empire, you traded all around the world, and you in the middle of the ocean, you will want to see an object that show up to know where you at. So obelisk would be one of the first things, probably a sea when you get out in the ocean to know where you're going and where you at. See, and this fact brings us to still higher point in the primitive history of the continent. Pyramidal piles of earth and stone are the peculiar marks by which we may discover the sites of the earliest settlements of mankind. The idea of such piles first appeared in the valley of the Euphrates and culminated in the valley of the Nile, which appeared practically the same time period. Whatever their forms, or whatever situated in Asia or in Africa, one condition is common to them all, intended primarily for astronomical observatories. The side of each accurately corresponds with the cardinal points. This is also the case with the pyramids of America, in determining the epoch of the aboriginal migrations to that continent. This remarkable coexistence of or analogy again carried us back to that period when mankind have been dissipated in the plains of Shinar, which is to us northeast of Mexico. Another name for Shinar, Mexico. So, or Africa. Had reestablished themselves in different quarters of the globe. We have already referred, you see, of the globe. So they even know that Shinar is not simply that riverway that historians coincided with. You're talking about an empire. We have already referred to the magnificent pyramid structures of Mexico, which, excepting the shrines, were undoubtedly the work of the Toltecans, and not, if not an earlier people. But be that as it may, there are pyramidal ruins in Yucatan and Central America of much more ancient date than any ever found elsewhere in the New World. So ancient indeed as to compare with similar monuments in Egypt, which are generally ascribed to the Mephite period. If, as we believe, the New World borrowed its design for such structure, the Aborigines must have traveled to the valley of the Nile for that purpose, rather than brought them from the shores of the Euxine and the Caspian Sea. So we again showing us chapter 47, their dominions, North Central South America, and North Africa, the western portion. But you can see they've been going into Egypt even back then, and what they believe was from America, not from the Caspian Sea, which is where they put Shinar at. Um, we can go to the next slide and then wrap this up. The same unalterable form satisfied the devotion or the taste of successful generations, and consequently no improvement was made upon them. In the types of primitive art, the old world merely reflected the light of the new world merely reflected the light of the old world. Hence, there was no warmth or creative power in it, because they seen the same thing. They don't see nothing uh, totally different. They seen some kind of connection, which would make sense, because if you look up at something totally different from the other side, then that means you looking at it as of Columbus being discovered America 1492. So everything that you find on the other side, you expect to be brought there after that from people in the East. And that's the wrong way to look at it. See, that Africa, I must something. All right, yeah, generation after generation severely copied each other, but which gradually diminished scale or at almost the exact ratio of the distance from the separated them from Central America and Yucatan. And that's bound to happen because people don't want to honor their foremothers and forefathers. They want to do things their way. So every generation we lose a little bit of this knowledge. So that Africa, not the East, was the original source of their inspiration, perhaps about the age of the fourth Egyptian dynasty, may be inferred partly from the precarious situation, internal economy, and identical embellishment of the structures in question, and partly from the most primitive mode of sculpture observable in the immediate vicinity of them. And the person who writing this in taking an account walls and natural natural destructions, natural storms, earthquakes, stuff like that. A lot of things can hide things. Like right now, they finding after they write this book, they start to continue to find whole city structures under the ground that show that they got to go back and look again and see that even a more ancient version hidden under lakes. So the powers invariably be erected for the purpose of sacred oblation in close proximity of water. All our structures and our things been in their rivers or the coast. either on the bank of a stream or on the shore of a lake, or in the absence of these artificial ponds, they've created their own ponds, are of proportionate dimension. And again, you can find these ponds and these lakes. You can tell they're man-made, be perfect squares and circles and stuff. Perfect. Has been evacuated at its base. Central apartments for the preservation of the sacred elements, reached by descending galleries of the particular angle of declination, are found in all of them, as well as a secret communication with the rivers, lake, and pond, usually by means of a subterranean passage. So we're going under the ground, underground passages. And lastly, the neighboring valley or plain, as in the case may be, is filled with innumerable catacombs in many localities hewed out of solid rock. So it's the old world, the ancient world, and America is a part of that world. We're reading this now. The Great Pyramid of the Plateau of Karnawaka, and known as Koshiaukalco. We talked about that in an earlier video. Calco is at a place called Hoximalco, which is a Carthaginian general. Himaco. The House of Flowers is reported to be scarcely distinguishable from the ordinary type of those in Lower Egypt. You see the House of Flowers, just like La Florida, the land of flowers. Its position and configuration show to be one of the groups of adjacent hills. It is truncated and divided into 4 terraces. Okay, so this should be it. We'll finish in the next one. Continue with the Grand Orient. It's from the book Archaeologically of North America. 1867, I think. Yeah. So much earlier than 1900s. So a lot of stuff they ain't found yet that would change a lot of this. But it's good to look at stuff from a lot of point of views and just know it all just information of a thing, event. And you use all your historical understandings of a certain time period and you formulate your own. That's why you'll be the ones who write the books for the future, right? So you can take things from different authors and different understandings, and you help them out most of the time, make sense of these things, because this person don't got this evidence yet. A lot of that's been found afterwards. You see, they talk about the phallus, the lingua, and that. So they've been finding some things, but they ain't find everything yet. We still ain't find everything, but we got a lot now. You see on the eastern seaboard, near the lakes, and near the rivers. And the Great Lakes also been created by man. We know that because the perfectness of how it flourished, all the cities and stuff around it couldn't have been natural. Or if it was natural, then the cities around it and the structures around it been built to take advantage of it. So anyway, we'll stop right there and see you in the next one.